The moment I hit the floor, I didn't feel anything. 1 second I was standing in the vitamin aisle of Crawford's Pharmacy on Fifth Avenue, reaching for a bottle of magnesium on the top shelf. The next second, the ceiling was rushing toward me, and the fluorescent lights above blurred into a single white streak. My knees gave out completely. My shoulder caught the edge of the metal shelving on the way down. I heard the bottles scatter across the linoleum before the sound faded too. When I opened my eyes, a woman was crouched beside me. She had gray hair cut short and practical, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the focused expression of someone who'd seen this kind of thing before. Her hands were moving with quiet efficiency, and it took me a full 3 seconds to realize she was unfastening the clasp on the watch my daughter had given me. "What are you doing?" My voice came out rough, barely a whisper. "That's mine." She didn't stop. Her fingers kept working the clasp with careful precision. "I know," she said. "That's exactly why I'm taking it off." I tried to sit up, and the room tilted hard to the left. She placed one firm hand on my shoulder and held me still without effort, the way someone does when they're used to patients who don't know what's good for them. "Don't move yet," she said. "You've been down for almost 2 minutes. Your color is coming back, but I need you to stay flat for another 30 seconds. She finally got the clasp open and slipped the watch off my wrist. She held it up to the pharmacy's overhead light, turning it slowly, studying the face of it the way a jeweler studies a stone for flaws. The expression that crossed her face in that moment is something I've replayed many times since. It wasn't confusion, it was recognition. And under the recognition, something colder. "Sir," she said, and her voice had changed. It was quieter now, more careful, the way people speak when they've just understood something they wish they hadn't. "Who gave you this watch?" "I'll get to all of it. But first let me tell you who I am and how I ended up lying on the floor of a pharmacy while a stranger held my wrist and my world began to come apart at every seam. My name is Robert Haynes. I'm 63 years old. For 31 years, I was a structural architect in Seattle, the kind who specializes in the bones of large buildings, the load-bearing systems, the hidden frameworks that determine whether something stands or falls. I retired early, at 61, because my wife Carol was sick, and because nothing else in the world mattered as much as being home with her. Carol died 18 months ago, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 59 years old, and she was the most structurally sound person I've ever known, which is a strange thing to say about a woman, but she'd understand it. She knew how I thought. She always understood the way I saw the world, in terms of what holds, what fails, what was built to last, and what was just decorated to look that way. After she died, I rattled around our house in Wallingford for a while. It's a 4-bedroom Craftsman we'd bought when our daughter was 3 years old. I knew every board in that house. I knew which stair creaked on the left side and which window stuck in the summer heat. I knew the way afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor in October, the specific amber color it turned when it hit the hardwood. Carol had loved that light. She used to sit at the kitchen table with her coffee just to be in it. Our daughter, Hannah, lived in Portland, about 3 hours south. She's 34 now, works in finance, and has her mother's dark eyes and her mother's organizational instincts, but without the warmth underneath. That sounds harsh. I know it does. But it's honest, and honesty is the only thing I have left that feels entirely mine. Hannah came up to Seattle twice in the 6 months after Carol's death. She helped me go through her mother's things, suggested I look into grief counseling, asked careful questions about the house and whether I'd considered downsizing. She was attentive in the way a person is attentive when they're paying very close attention for reasons that aren't entirely about you. I told myself I was being unfair. She'd lost her mother. Grief makes people strange. Grief makes everyone a little unfamiliar, even to themselves. I gave her the benefit of every doubt I had. My neighbor and oldest friend, a man named Phil Dorsey, who'd worked with me at the firm for 22 years, didn't give Hannah any benefit of the doubt at all. Phil is 67, recently retired himself, and has the particular clarity of a man who spent decades identifying structural weakness for a living. "Something's off about her," he told me one evening on my back porch, about 8 months after Carol died. We were having a beer and watching the light go out over the lake. "The way she looks at your house. The way she looks at you." I told him he was reading too much into grief. He gave me a long sideways look and said nothing else, which was the most Phil thing he could possibly have done. Hannah called more frequently after that first year, multiple times a week, sometimes every day. She asked about my sleep, my appetite, whether I was taking my vitamins, whether I'd had my blood pressure checked recently. It felt like being watched over. It felt like love. I've spent a great deal of time since then understanding how those two things can be made to look exactly the same. She came up to Seattle in person about 4 months before the day I collapsed in the pharmacy. She arrived on a Friday afternoon with a weekender bag and a small wrapped box under her arm. We had dinner at the kitchen table the way we used to when she was a teenager, just the two of us, Carol's empty chair in the corner of my vision the whole time. After dinner, Hannah set the box on the table and slid it toward me. "I've been worried about you, Dad," she said. Her voice was careful, warm. She had her mother's eyes, and when she looked at me with concern, it was very easy to see Carol in her. I think she knew that. I think she'd always known that. Inside the box was a watch. Not a traditional watch, but a sleek, dark-banded device with a small digital display on the face. It looked expensive. It looked medical. It looked, in every possible way, like something designed to inspire confidence. "It's called the Vital Guard Pro," Hannah explained. She leaned forward with her elbows on the table, the posture of someone presenting something important. "It tracks your heart rate, blood oxygen, sleep quality, stress markers. The whole system connects to an app on my phone so I can monitor your readings in real time. If anything looks wrong, I'll know immediately." She paused. "Dad, you're alone up here. You won't see a doctor unless you're forced to. At least this way, I can keep an eye on you from Portland." The logic of it was impeccable. The concern in her voice sounded completely genuine. I was 62 years old, 18 months out from losing my wife, living alone in a 4-bedroom house, and my daughter was offering me a technological lifeline. What kind of father refuses that? I strapped it on that same evening. It fit perfectly, as if the band had been measured for my wrist specifically. "You need to wear it constantly," Hannah said. "Even when you sleep. The sleep tracking only works with continuous contact." She showed me the app on her phone, the live display of my heart rate, a small green number pulsing steadily. "See? I can see you right now. I know you're okay." She smiled when she said it. I smiled back. 2 weeks later, the headaches started. They came on without warning, a pressure behind my eyes that built slowly over the course of an hour, then faded. I'd had headaches before in my life. Who hasn't? But these felt different, not sharp like a tension headache, or pounding like dehydration. These felt like static, like a frequency just outside of normal hearing that was somehow making itself known inside my skull. I mentioned them to Hannah during one of our daily calls. She was immediately concerned and immediately composed, which in retrospect is a very specific combination. "That could be blood pressure related," she said. "I've actually been looking at your sleep data and your resting heart rate has been slightly elevated for the past week. I think you're not sleeping deeply enough. I want you to add a few supplements to your routine." She'd already researched it, she said. She'd already ordered everything. A package arrived 2 days later containing 4 different bottles: magnesium glycinate, CoQ10, a fish oil blend, and something labeled NeuroClear, which she described as a proprietary cognitive support formula specifically formulated for adults over 60. "Take the NeuroClear twice a day, with food," she said during our next call. "The magnesium at night before bed, the other 2 in the morning." I did exactly what she said. I took everything at the times she specified. I wore the watch every hour of every day, and the headaches continued, and then the dizziness began, and then the fog. That's the only word I have for it, fog. It settled in during the 3rd week, this sensation of standing slightly behind myself, of thoughts that arrived a half-second slower than they should have. I'd been a man who drew precise structural plans, who calculated load tolerances to 4 decimal places, who caught measurement errors that junior architects missed by fractions. Now, I was standing in my own kitchen at 11 in the morning trying to remember why I'd walked in there. I told Hannah about the fog. She was concerned. She adjusted my supplement schedule. She asked me to take detailed notes of when it happened, what I'd eaten, how long I'd slept. She called it a symptom log, and she told me to send it to her every evening. I kept the log, I sent it every evening. Phil came by one afternoon during the fourth week and sat with me in the kitchen. He watched me fumble with the coffee maker for about 30 seconds before he said, quietly and without any drama, "Robert, what is happening to you?" I told him about the headaches, the dizziness, the fog. I showed him the supplements lined up on the counter. He picked up the NeuroClear bottle and read the label front and back for a long time without speaking. "Who prescribed this?" he finally asked. "Hannah researched it," I said. He set the bottle down very carefully. "Has your own doctor seen you?" "Not Hannah. Your doctor." I realized, standing there in my kitchen, that I hadn't been to see my doctor in almost 3 months. The last appointment I'd scheduled, Hannah had suggested rescheduling because my readings on the watch were stable, and she didn't want me to overexert myself with a drive across town. I'd rescheduled. Then I'd forgotten to reschedule again. "I've been meaning to," I said. Phil looked at me with the specific expression of a man exercising tremendous self-control. "Call your doctor today," he said. "Not tomorrow. Today." I said I would. Hannah called that evening before I got the chance. And during our conversation, when I mentioned that Phil had suggested I see my own physician, she said something that I have thought about many times since. "Phil isn't a doctor, Dad," she said gently. "And he's always been overprotective of you, honestly. I think it comes from a good place. But he gets into your head, and he stresses you out. The watch shows a stress spike every time you spend time with him. Maybe for the next couple weeks while we're getting your reading stabilized, it would be better to limit that contact. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it's the part I'm least proud of." I believed her. I told Phil I needed some quiet time. I said I was feeling overwhelmed and needed to reduce stimulation. He accepted it, because Phil is a decent man who respects other people's stated needs, even when he suspects those needs have been manufactured by someone else. I spent the next 2 weeks more alone than I'd been at any point since Carol died. The fog thickened. I started losing track of time in ways that frightened me. I'd look up from a book and an hour had passed that I couldn't fully account for. I started writing things down just to hold on to them. Appointments, the names of things, the sequence of daily tasks, the list of tasks that had once been automatic. The watch was always on my wrist. It glowed green in the dark when I woke up at 3 in the morning and lay there trying to hold my own thoughts together. Hannah called every morning. Her first question was always the same. "How are you feeling, Dad? Readings look good from here." Her second question was usually some variation on whether I'd taken my supplements and what I'd eaten and how long I'd slept. Every conversation ended with a reminder to rest, to avoid stress, to trust the process. I was trying very hard to trust the process. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I finally left the house for something other than the grocery store. I needed magnesium. I'd run out 2 days earlier, and Hannah had specifically said I shouldn't skip it, that it was essential for the sleep quality the watch was tracking. Crawford's Pharmacy was 4 blocks from my house. I walked. The morning air was cool, and the leaves on the maples were turning, and for about 3 blocks, walking through that particular Seattle light with the smell of wet concrete and fallen leaves, I felt almost like myself. Then I was standing in the vitamin aisle with my hand reaching up toward the top shelf, and everything went white and I was on the floor. The woman crouching beside me set the watch down on the linoleum between us. She looked at me with an expression that was professional and concerned, and something else I couldn't name yet. "I'm Margaret Ellison," she said. "I'm the pharmacist here. I've owned this pharmacy for 18 years. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." I told her to go ahead. "How long have you been feeling this way? The dizziness, the cognitive issues. Don't tell me you're fine. I watched you come through that door, and I could see it before you even got to the aisle." Something about the directness of it, the complete absence of softening language, broke something open in me. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I needed someone to ask me that question without a side agenda attached. I told her everything, how long the symptoms had been going on, the supplements, the watch, the daily calls, the way Phil had been gently pushed out of my life, the fog that kept getting thicker. While I talked, Margaret picked up the NeuroClear bottle I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket to compare with the pharmacy's stock. She read the label with the same focused attention she'd given the watch. And then she went very still. "Mr. Haynes," she said, "I've been a licensed pharmacist for 26 years. I know every supplement line that runs through this distributor network. I have never seen this product. She turned the bottle to show me the label. This manufacturer name doesn't appear in any registry I have access to. The ingredient list is partially accurate, but there are 3 compounds here that do not belong in a cognitive support formula. Not even close. She tapped the small print near the bottom, this one in particular. At a sustained low dose over several weeks, it causes exactly what you're describing. Cognitive dulling, reduced processing speed, short-term memory disruption. The pharmacy was quiet. A ceiling fan moved slowly overhead. I could hear my own breathing. "And the watch," Margaret said, picking it up again. She turned it over and examined the back of the casing with the focused precision of someone who knew what they were looking for. "I've seen something like this before. Once, about 2 years ago. A customer came in, elderly woman, completely confused about what medications she was taking. Her son had given her a device. She paused. The electromagnetic field these produce, at certain frequencies, can affect neurological function, especially in older adults with any existing vulnerability. Combined with whatever's in these supplements, combined, I repeated, combined, Margaret said, it would look almost exactly like early cognitive decline, like the beginning of dementia. She looked at me directly, which is exactly what someone would want it to look like if they were trying to establish that you weren't fully capable of managing your own affairs. The word affairs landed in my chest like a dropped weight. Property, the house, Carol's life insurance, the retirement accounts we'd built together over 30 years. My hands were not entirely steady when I said, "My daughter gave me both of those." Margaret didn't say anything right away. She set the watch down between us on the linoleum where I was still sitting against the shelving. Then she sat down on the floor beside me, because that was apparently the kind of woman she was, the kind who gets down on your level when you're receiving news that might change everything. "Do you have a doctor you trust?" she asked. "Not one your daughter recommended. Your own doctor." "Yes," I said. "I do." "Then that's your next call," she said. "And the call after that, depending on what you decide you want to do, might be to a lawyer or to the police." She paused. "Or both." My phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with Hannah's name. She called every morning between 9 and 9:30. It was 9:18. Margaret looked at the phone. She didn't tell me what to do. She just waited. Let it ring. That afternoon I called Phil. I didn't explain everything over the phone. I just said I needed him to come over and that I was sorry about the last few weeks and that I'd been wrong to push him away. He arrived 45 minutes later with a bag of takeout because Phil has always understood that difficult conversations go better with food. I told him everything. I watched his face move through about 6 different expressions in silence before he finally said, "I want you to know that I'm not going to say I told you so." "I know," I said, "even though I told you so." "I know, Phil." He sat with his hands folded on the table for a moment, then, "What do you need from me?" I needed him to come with me to my doctor the next morning. I needed him to be there in case the fog made it hard to explain everything clearly. He said yes before I'd finished asking. Dr. Warren Chen had been my physician for 11 years. He is methodical, unhurried, and constitutionally opposed to jumping to conclusions, which are all qualities I'd always appreciated in him, and which I appreciated even more that morning when he listened to the full account of the past 4 months without expression. He ran a panel of blood work. He examined the supplements. He referred the watch to a biomedical engineer colleague for electromagnetic assessment. He told me to stop taking everything Hannah had given me and to stop wearing the watch immediately. Then he sat across from me with his hands on his desk and said, "Robert, I want to be careful about what I say here because I don't want to make accusations I can't support yet. But the compound profile in this supplement, if the preliminary analysis Margaret's given me is correct, is consistent with intentional cognitive suppression. This isn't a poorly formulated product. This is something that was designed to do what it did." 3 days after that appointment, Margaret called me with the full analysis she'd run through a pharmaceutical chemist she knew at the University of Washington. The compounds confirmed. The watch had been assessed. The electromagnetic output was outside any approved medical range, specifically tuned to frequencies known to disrupt prefrontal cortex function at the level of sustained exposure. Someone had engineered both of these things. Someone who understood chemistry and biomedical electronics. someone with resources, and possibly with connections to other people who understood both. Phil drove me to the attorney's office on a Thursday morning. Her name was Diana Marsh, and she specialized in elder financial abuse cases. She had short silver hair and the brisk, no-nonsense energy of someone who'd spent 20 years watching people be taken advantage of by the people who were supposed to love them most. She listened to everything. She looked at the analysis reports Margaret had provided. She looked at the supplement bottles and the written record I'd been keeping, which had, ironically, become more detailed the more confused I'd felt. An old habit from my architecture days of documenting everything when I didn't fully trust my memory. Your daughter has been receiving daily data from this watch. For how long? Diana asked. About 4 months, I said, meaning she has 4 months of your GPS location, your vital signs, and depending on the device's capabilities, possibly audio from your home environment. She paused. And she's been systematically reducing your contact with your support network, manipulating your medical care, and administering substances designed to diminish your cognitive capacity. That's a coordinated pattern, Mr. Haynes. In my experience, coordinated patterns don't emerge in isolation. She leaned forward. Has Hannah recently raised the subject of power of attorney? Of changes to your estate documents? Of the house? The house. I thought about the questions Hannah had asked in the months after Carol's death, the careful ones about downsizing and estate planning, and whether I'd updated my will since her mother's passing. The conversations I'd filed away as normal grief-adjacent practicalities. She's brought it up, I said. Diana nodded slowly. I think we need to contact the authorities. What happened in the weeks that followed is still difficult to hold in one piece. The Seattle Police White-Collar Crimes Unit. Then, quickly, the FBI, because of what they found when they started pulling on the threads Diana had identified. The watch hadn't been manufactured by a wellness company. It had been produced by a network operating out of 3 countries, distributing custom surveillance and cognitive disruption devices through a supply chain that moved through shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. The supplements had been sourced through a similar network, engineered by a chemist whose work had been used in at least 11 other cases across the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. 11. That was just the confirmed number in this region. Hannah had been recruited 8 months before she came to Seattle with that small wrapped box. She'd been approached through a financial contact, someone who'd identified her as a person with proximity to an elderly parent with significant assets and a history of emotional distance from that parent. They'd offered her a consulting fee that escalated based on how far the process advanced. Documentation of cognitive decline, establishment of medical dependency, introduction to a financial advisor who would, at the right moment, suggest a power of attorney review. The house alone was worth $900,000. When the FBI agent, a woman named Special Agent Reyes, laid this out for me in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and a view of a parking garage, I sat very still and tried to hold on to everything I knew about structural integrity, about what holds and what fails, about the difference between a load-bearing wall and a decorative one. Hannah had loved me. I believe that. I believe it in the specific, complicated way that acknowledges love and damage can coexist in a person, that someone can genuinely feel affection for a parent, and also, under the right pressure and the right financial incentive, choose to treat that parent as a resource to be managed. I've had a lot of conversations with a therapist about this particular knot, and I don't think I'll ever fully untangle it, but I've made peace with holding it as it is. What I know clearly is what she chose. Whatever she felt, she chose the money. She chose to make me smaller and slower and more dependent, so that someone else could move my assets into places I'd never find them. I did not make that easy for her, which is, I've come to understand, exactly what terrified her most. My attorney helped me secure a temporary protective order. I moved the relevant financial accounts and changed all access credentials before Hannah knew the investigation had begun. The house stayed in my name, as it always had been, as it always will be until I decide otherwise. The first time Hannah called after she'd been contacted by law enforcement, I answered. I don't know entirely why. Morbid curiosity, maybe. Or the need to hear her voice one more time with everything I now knew behind my eyes. Dad, she said, and then nothing else for several seconds. I know, I said. It wasn't, she started. and stopped again. "You don't have to," I said. "I'm not asking you to explain it to me. That's not why I answered." "Then why?" "I thought about it. To tell you that I'm okay," I said, "and that I'll stay okay, and that whatever they offered you, it wasn't worth this." She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost the careful control she'd always maintained. She sounded young in a way she hadn't in years. She said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I believe that too. I still do. It doesn't change what she did, but I believe it." I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap and looked at Carol's empty chair in the corner of the kitchen, and I let myself feel the full weight of everything at once. The grief of losing my wife, the grief of losing the daughter I'd thought I had, the strange and jagged relief of knowing the truth. It was not a gentle combination. I sat with it for a while anyway. The trial came 9 months later. By then, the federal case had expanded to include the two organizers of the network, both of whom were extradited from overseas after the kind of international law enforcement cooperation that Special Agent Reyes described as unusual and hard-won. There were 14 victims total, across 5 states. The youngest was 61. The oldest was 79. Diana prepared me for testimony the way a good attorney does, not by telling me what to say, but by making sure I understood what I already knew. She sat across from me in her office with my own documentation spread on the table between us, the supplement records, the timeline I'd kept during those foggy months, the assessment reports from Dr. Warren and Margaret's pharmacist colleague. "You're a structural architect," she said during one of our prep sessions. "You spent 3 decades documenting evidence of how things fail. You're going to walk in there and do exactly that. You're going to show the jury, with precision, how this structure was built and exactly where the load-bearing failures occurred." That framing helped me more than she probably knew. Phil drove me to the courthouse on the first morning of trial. He wore a jacket and tie, which he almost never does, and he didn't say anything about it when I pointed it out. He just straightened the tie and kept driving. Margaret came too. She'd been subpoenaed as an expert witness, but she came early and sat in the gallery during my testimony. I saw her in the second row when I took the stand. She gave me a single nod that meant "I've got you," and that was enough. I will not pretend the cross-examination was easy. Hannah's defense attorney was good at her job. She pressed on the idea that I'd been confused, that my grief over Carol had impaired my judgment, that I'd misinterpreted my daughter's concern as something sinister. She was skilled at making genuine care and manufactured dependency look identical on the surface. The jury was not confused. I could see it in the way they listened, not with the uncertain shifting of people being sold a story they couldn't quite follow, but with the still, concentrated attention of people understanding something clearly for the first time. When Dr. Warren testified about the pharmacological profile of the NeuroClear compound, I watched 3 jurors take notes. When Margaret explained, in language she'd carefully calibrated for clarity without condescension, exactly what the watch had been doing to my neurological function at the level of sustained electromagnetic exposure, the juror in the second row, a man in his mid-60s who'd reminded me of Phil from the first day of trial, closed his eyes briefly. I understood the gesture. Some information lands in the body before it lands in the mind. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts for Hannah. Elder abuse, criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, and criminal administration of a harmful substance, a charge the prosecution had added based on Dr. Warren's testimony. The 2 network operators received additional federal sentences. Outside the courthouse, in the cold October air with the smell of rain coming in off the sound, Phil stood beside me while reporters called questions from a respectful distance that Diana had negotiated in advance. I didn't have a statement prepared. I hadn't thought I'd need one. But they asked, and Phil looked at me, and I said what was true. "I spent 31 years building structures designed to hold weight," I said. "The most important structural principle I know is this: the ones that fail are usually the ones where something essential was hidden, where the weakness was built in and then covered over so it wasn't visible until the load became too great." I paused. "You cannot protect yourself from what you can't see. That's true in architecture. It's true in every other kind of structure that matters." Margaret was standing near Diana when I said it. She caught my eye and did the same quiet nod she'd given me from the gallery. We had dinner that night. The four of us. Phil, Diana, Margaret, and me, at a restaurant near the water. Phil ordered wine he'd been saving for an occasion, and didn't specify which occasion he'd been saving it for, which made Diana laugh, which was the best sound I'd heard in a long time. What I want to tell you, if you've stayed with me this far, is what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. 18 months after the trial, I'm back in my house in Wallingford. The kitchen still gets that amber light in October. Carol's chair is still in the corner, and I've decided not to move it, because I've also decided that grief doesn't have to be tidied away. It can be present, and so can everything else. Both things can occupy the same room. Phil comes for dinner twice a week. He still doesn't say I told you so. I've stopped waiting for it. Margaret and I have become, in the way that surprises you when you're not young, and you've stopped expecting to be surprised, something more than the stranger who found me on the floor of a pharmacy. We don't put a name on it. We don't need to. What we have is grounded in honesty, in two people who've seen enough of the world to know the difference between something real and something that's been built to look real. She knows the difference because she spent 26 years recognizing what doesn't belong. I know the difference because I spent 31 years learning to see what's hidden inside the walls. We started an advocacy program through Dr. Warren's practice, partnering with Crawford's Pharmacy, to train healthcare workers in the Pacific Northwest to identify early signs of technology-enabled elder abuse. We've trained 43 practitioners so far. 2 of them have already identified victims we were then able to connect with legal and medical support. Special Agent Reyes told me, during the follow-up call after sentencing, that my case had provided enough evidence to dismantle 3 connected networks across 2 countries. That the watch technology and the supplement compound were now formally classified as instruments of criminal abuse in federal law enforcement databases. She also told me that the 14 victims in the domestic case had all been connected to one another through a survivor support network that formed in the months after the trial. That most of them had believed, before the investigation, that what had happened to them was a private family failure, a personal weakness, something shameful and specific to their own lives. None of them had known they were part of a pattern. I know what that isolation feels like. I know the particular loneliness of a fog that no one can see, that looks, from the outside, like ordinary aging. I know how easy it is to mistake surveillance for care when the surveillance comes from someone you've loved for 30 years. I also know what it feels like to have someone kneel down on a linoleum floor beside you in a pharmacy on a Tuesday morning and ask you the question you didn't know you were waiting for. How long have you been feeling this way? Answer me honestly. If someone in your life is controlling your medications, monitoring your movements, gradually separating you from the people who love you, and telling you it's for your own protection, I want you to hear this clearly. That is not protection. Real protection does not require your isolation. Real care does not get stronger when you're weaker. Real love does not need you to be diminished in order to help you. If that pattern sounds familiar, please reach out to someone outside the circle that's been drawn around you. A doctor you chose yourself, a friend who was there before, an attorney who specializes in this kind of harm. You are not confused. You are not too old to understand what is happening to you, and you are not alone, even when everything around you has been arranged to make you feel that way. I know, because someone knelt down on the floor beside me and refused to leave until I knew it too. And I thank God for pharmacists who read labels the way they were trained to, for friends who say the hard thing and then come back anyway, for the particular quality of October light in a craftsman kitchen that has survived everything and still shows up every year, amber and steady and exactly as it was. I'm still here. The structure held. If this story found you at the right moment, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share it with them. Not tomorrow, today.